Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Monaco Streaming Film Festival's ongoing series on the business of streaming. Today, we're joined by Verne, who's the CEO of Wave Sports and Entertainment, as we discuss meeting fans on their terms. If you're a sports fan, chances are that you've watched something from Wave Sports, even if you didn't know it. And that's part of what we'll be discussing today. Brian, hello, thanks for joining us. And for those who don't know, could you give us a little overview of what Wave Sports and Entertainment does and how you came to be?
Yeah, appreciate it, Gavin. I'll spend a few minutes and maybe just walk folks through just the overall genesis, or manifestation of Wave Sports and Entertainment, or WSE for short. I always tell folks when we started this business, about 4.5 years ago, I think there was a really simple but also a pretty massive misconception within the sports media industry at large, where it felt like you had, industry insiders, industry leaders, really everyone alike, was saying that, sports fandom and engagement, might be decreasing amongst this next generation of fans because television consumption, is going down. And, while TV ratings or, traditional consumption of sports content, might be down, we actually felt like sports fandom and engagement was not only not decreasing amongst this next generation, but it was actually at an all-time high, and just had shifted from, that big screen on our walls, to the TVs in our pockets, that being our phones and, the various social and digital platforms, Instagram, Snapchat, Discover, TikTok, which I guess didn't even exist at the time, but, Facebook, YouTube, so on and so forth. And so that being, called a general precursor of sorts, we then took this approach that, sports in and of itself is just so inherently global. So you look around all four corners of the world, and there are dozens upon dozens of, these unique fandoms, that exist and manifest. And that's certainly everything from, your big four or your big five, more traditional sports, but also very much inclusive of, everything else on the margins, non-traditional sports, newer or emerging sports and categories, or anything else you could possibly imagine in between. And so if you zoom out at our business today, we've now built, this whole portfolio, of roughly 24 or so odd sports focused digital media brands, again, very much representative or, inclusive of that broad spectrum of global sports fandoms and categories.
So I think that's an interesting thing that you touched on there, because you do tend to almost forget that pretty much any sport has a fan base, right? And is monetizable. When you mentioned it goes beyond the big five. And, in my head, I thought of just the countries that I've come into contact with. And there's, like you have Australian rules football, obviously big in a country, but not big anywhere else. But you can still use those minor sports. I'd say maybe in this country, lacrosse is one that springs to mind that isn't played anywhere else that I could think of, but you still have a fan base, right? Like you
Sure.
Really have fans for everything that are out there, and it must give you more opportunities to find people.
Yeah, I'll probably touch on this, a little bit later too, but I think when you're in the media and entertainment space, you're really a hospitality based business, and what I mean by that is it relates to us is, especially taking a global point of view, all around the world, they're all different types of people. And, we might be equally rabid sports fans, but, we have different interests, we have different motivations, we have different, sensibilities. And as a result, in different, as I mentioned, in, different quadrants or corners of the world, fandom might be stronger, here for one thing, or in another place, for another sport or category. And so, taking a global approach, we thought it was only fitting, to be really representative and inclusive of, as many different types of fandoms and subcultures as possible. So
what type of content do you share with the different types of fans on social?
So it's multifaceted. And so when, we kind of thought about, how we would construct and build this business, it was, twofold or, even threefold to a certain extent. First and foremost, regardless of the type of programming, it's always format driven. And so regardless of the medium or the platform you're on, the key to successful and resonant or engaging programming is really mastering, the different formats. And so over the course of the last, 4.5 years, we've brought in the types of people, to, produce or uncover what it means to produce, for instance, a really great Snapchat Discover show or an Instagram TV series, or, primarily short form social or digital video. Then, the second part of that equation or question that we asked ourselves was, how do you either integrate or ultimately produce, great IP? And so once again, we took a bit of a global POV here where we said, all around the world, you have thousands upon thousands of leagues, rights holders, sports properties, or, IP holders, all who are facing a similar challenge in the sense that, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to reach that younger fan base in the places that they used to spend their time. Yet they have great IP or great content libraries. And that's everything from short form highlights to, in many cases, we're talking decades worth of archival footage. So we now work with about 150, different leading global leagues and rights holders, utilizing those content libraries as kind of key inputs or, integral components to develop, the dozens upon dozens of short form shows, that, you see on a daily or weekly basis, across our different media brands and franchises.
So you mentioned formats, and I know you're on pretty much all of the major social, right? Like Snap, Instagram, TikTok. Does Facebook count these days?
Yeah.
But formats keep emerging, right? Like TikTok with a slightly different format. I'm sure there'll be another new one soon. Does that provide a challenge to producers for creating content? Do you almost have to have like one, does each format or each social platform have its own format? And does the proliferation of them make life difficult at all?
I mean, I certainly think that, is a key to success. And I, kind of loosely, I think, insinuated this, earlier in our chat, but, this notion of really, catering the formats and the programming, to the platform or the specific medium. And so, the way that you're going to produce, a highly watched, a highly engaged, Snapchat Discover show, that's going to differ from, what you might do on another platform. So taking that very, kind of personalized approach, to developing our content across the different platforms and mediums, has been something that I think our team has really focused on and, certainly has, begun to master.
I just imagine it's hard enough for me keeping track of it from an analyst perspective. So I know but I can see it gives opportunity too, because you just have further and further reach, more people to find more ways of reaching people, which is great too. So one quick question I have for you is something to do with fandom, right? And I think it's very important in today's landscape to understand that, like you said this before, that people had a misconception of fandom, right? Like the fandom is changing, but fundamentally fandom remains the same. And, I think that the assumption that because people were not watching TV as much, they weren't going to be as integrated in sports as much. This all happened around the same time. A large number of big bets on the future were made without really much correlation. Everyone was just going to watch all TV all the time on their phone. No one would ever watch. There were times I'd go to conferences and people would declare that TVs as a device were dead for the future. No one's going to sit on their couch and watch a big screen, which nowadays you're like, no, that's crazy. But what do you think are some basic misconceptions around the changing nature of fandom? Like where are these misideas coming from?
Look, I mean, I think the answer, is somewhat simple in the sense, or at least the approach that we took, which is just being, mindful and perceptive of, the world around us. And so, media has evolved from generation to generation, from print to radio to television, to web, to mobile web, to, now, where we are with this whole kind of social and digital media, and even, I guess Web3, phenomena at this point in time. And, and sports is one of those, interesting categories, in particular, where, fans, once again, for generations on end, we've always cared, about a lot of the same, or at the very least, similar storylines, or amazing moments. And so, when you think about our business, it's not even necessarily reinventing the wheel. It's just adapting to changing, fan behavior. And once again, being mindful and aware as to where that younger generation, that quote unquote Gen Z and young millennial, is spending their time. And then in a lot of ways, just once again using that formats buzzword, finding the formats and figuring out the different ways to tell a lot of the same stories that even I grew up caring about. Granted, it was probably more likely to be an hour-long TV show when I was a kid, and now it might be a 3-minute Snap Discover show or Instagram TV episode or YouTube show driven by your favorite personality.
I think you actually said something very, very interesting there about storylines, because I'd never really considered this, and then immediately saw it happen as you said this, fall into place in my mind. I've never considered that games have a storyline, and that's not the case for every game, but I feel like, the recent NFL games being an example, right? There's been some like really interesting storylines in that. Some soccer games have that story too, where it's like a back and forth, someone comes up and a surprising event happens. Does being focused on say, like, I guess, highlights and packaging together shorter clips, does that give you the ability, when these sort of storylines happen in a sporting event, you can kind of go out there and really put that story together, whereas it may be difficult on a more longer tail format?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the solution in our world is somewhat twofold, and again, maybe tying this back to a more relatable analogy. When you think about traditional television coverage, for something like the Super Bowl, which is coming up in a couple weeks, out here in LA, for example, you have personalities that we grew up watching on TV, and they're on the ground, they're doing tailgate coverage or pregame shows, and it's in more of a traditional linear environment, and that was great, and many of us still watch that today. When I talk about our business, once again, it's really no different. It's just using these different content mechanisms, that are resonant and relatable with the fans that we serve. So that might be even something as simple as a meme, or stories on a platform like Instagram, or sending out some of our talent and personalities to do a man on the street or woman on the street type of show. Engaging with fans similarly to what you saw on television. Just the final output is different. And then secondly, and I imagine we might touch on this a little bit later, but this idea of, I'd say, kind of democratizing who gets to tell the stories, on your more traditional linear networks and whatnot. And again, thinking about my childhood, the narratives were driven by 5 or 10 individuals. Those key hosts and anchors that certainly became household names and a major part of the fabric of sports and entertainment. Today you have hundreds, if not thousands, of emerging voices and talent that have their own unique point of view, can give commentary about a particular topic or event, and that's a big direction where we're headed, in particular, to complement some of our short form clip or highlight driven programming. Is discovering the next generation of faces and voices and giving them opportunities, to weigh in and, share their points of view about what's going on in the global world of sport.
You just made me laugh, because you were saying that. I was thinking, I don't get to watch him because I'm not in the UK anymore, but I always watch clips of Roy Keane doing soccer punditry, because he's so miserable post Gavin. And he's like, you can't have everyone that way, but you need a mixture. Yeah, everyone can't be upbeat all the time. So I want to talk to you about how Wave Sports you've been very successful in parlaying the emergence of social with the changes in media habits of consumers. What do you think has driven people to embrace social media for sports consumption?
I really think that this next generation use their mobile device and these different social and digital platforms as that is their primary form of entertainment. And so being able to go on to choose FTBL as an example, which is our global football brand. If a fan can get the the gun highlights, or can see some sort of infographics or a 2 or 3 minute take from Noah, who's one of our football personalities. It's just a shorter cut down of what was a small piece of a longer form of programming. So again, I think was just the adaptability of how fans are behaving, and naturally the mobile device, at least in its current form, didn't exist when we were growing up, at least as a form of entertainment, and now it does with all these different platforms.
No, only on the Jetsons, right? I'm thinking too that if anything, content being available on social with all the different brands that you have is it's a way really of increasing engagement, right? And putting the sports in front of the consumers more frequently than before they really had an opportunity to do. Because you think, going back 20 years, if you wanted to travel around and you weren't at home, you'd have to have a newspaper or a magazine on the sport, and that was it, right? Like there was no evolving. You had to wait for the next day to see what happened. That you really didn't get to be this engaged. Whereas now, as we're seeing in this country, with ratings of pretty much all sports this year, viewers haven't abandoned watching sports on TV. They're just more into sports almost. There's more monetizing of the fans as well, but you're able to reach them more frequently and find them in areas where before you couldn't.
Correct.
It's well, actually, on that note, how many brands do you have?
About 24 different media brands, or call it franchises of sort.
And how let's take the football or FTBL brand. How does that work? Do you have highlights from different leagues? Is it just conversations? Like how do you put that together?
Yeah, so going back to the earlier part of our combo, thinking about taking a very platform specific approach. FTBL, for instance, lives across Instagram. There's a Snapchat Discover show. There's TikTok. There's Facebook, and now more recently YouTube. If I'm not mistaken, I think FTBL is can also be found on some out of home platforms or services. But then the varying degrees of programming, everything from tapping into the meme subculture to the different stories features, to utilizing our league and rights holder partners to develop highlight based or clip compilations, to now integrating our in-house talent and personalities into short form shows, whether that's a 1 to 2 minute cut down that might live across an Instagram or TikTok, or whether that's a 7 to 10 minute show that would live on a platform like YouTube. And then certainly thinking about the future, when it comes to audio or podcasts and podcasts, and even the AVOD OTT fast channel space, as a means to really shift a lot of our original programming.
I want to touch on something that you said before about how emerging media's help democratize who gets to tell the stories, as in not just like the key hosts who are appointed by networks. But is there something too about how it can democratize sport in general? So I say that from the perspective of someone who grew up in the UK watching a bad soccer team, my local soccer team, Southend United, never set the world on fire, but you could still be entertained, right? Like you'd have a year where they'd score some cracking goals, but there's sometimes an assumption that only the elite levels of sport can create good moments. And I'm imagining, like something like Wave Sports can actually help find the moments outside of the Premier League and just say, look, someone scored an amazing goal in the Ukraine, Ukraine. Here it is. Is that maybe not perhaps the driving ethos of Wave Sports, but is that something that can happen sometimes?
Oh, certainly. Look, like a great moment in sport is a great moment in sport. Two, I think fandom of all shapes and sizes, it's very much tribal. It's something that that people can rally around, and again, regardless of whether it's more of a niche fandom with say 100,000 people around the world, that are very much into it, or something as global as football, with many hundreds of millions, not billions of fans. Fandom is tribal, regardless of the size. And then these platforms, enable discoverability, enable a personalized experience, which is really driven by search and the different feeds. And so one of the things that we found is, take a more, niche fandom, or a hypothesis that we might have had, you develop great programming around it, and people around the world seek it out. And I think that's something that we've seen time and time again.
Yeah, I think really once you're a fan of a sport, you don't really care where it's from. You just care about, oh my God, like if I could find a show that had like the best 50 goals of the last week, I wouldn't care if there were goals from Africa or Asia. I just want to see these amazing goals, right? Like, and you can appreciate it because you understand the art form. I want to give you a theoretical question here now, using an example from my past. So me and my friends, when we were at Southend High School for Boys growing up, we invented a game before it got banned called Violent Ball. And let's say we dusted Violent Ball off and it went pro and the crowds were eating it up and got, lots of excitement behind it. What would Wave Sports offer? So like a league, like obviously not really Violent Ball, but to give an example, what would you offer the league who's interested in partnering with you?
Yeah. So the way that we, typically work with leagues and rights holders, first and foremost, we, tap into existing content libraries. So that could be, shorter form highlights, from today or yesterday, depending on the league, or, call it the length of its existence. Some folks have been around for decades on end, so tapping into archives and, kind of resurfacing great moments that, maybe folks have never seen or forgot about. And then utilizing those clips, as key components into, a lot of these, shorter form shows. Now with the emergence of, our own talent-driven originals, division, also utilizing, those assets and those relationships, to develop, net new original shows. There's an exciting one, which I wish I could, speak about here, that'll be coming up, with one of our rights holder partners. But taking one of our personalities, or multiple personalities, and developing an original show around it, or even again going on the ground, to different sporting events and putting our spin on what a game day coverage might look like. And then interestingly enough, from a commercial point of view, and this was always a part of I think our hypothesis early on, is this is entirely net new social and digital inventory, which again is very much analogous to that TV experience. And so if sports properties and rights holders have existing sponsors, or we can bring net new sponsors into that programming, it's really bought and sold similar to television. Sponsorships of the biggest events in the world, a slate of daily original shows, even some live formats, and then the commercial, which call it a 6-second commercial on a platform like Snap Discover is somewhat akin, or very much akin, I should say, to a 30 or 60-second spot on TV. So to summarize that, I think it's enabling our rights holder partners to tap into this net new audience of younger sports fans, and also unlocking new commercial opportunities for everybody.
With that, Violent Ball makes it, I'm giving you a call. Another topic I've noticed personally now, because I live in New York where it just became legal, the increasing legalization of sports gambling. How does that impact both sports fandom and I guess create opportunities for you?
I mean, I think betting, on one hand is really a fandom or a subculture, in and of itself. I think that, in general, at least certainly in in North America, albeit probably a bit more mature, given that if I'm not mistaken, you can bet from your TV set in the UK. It's going to increasingly become more and more of a part of the fabric of this whole sports and entertainment ecosystem. It's another hook. It drives further engagement, and for us, it kind of checks that box of another category that's just a no-brainer to move into, from a community building and a content and programming, development point of view. So I certainly think it's fair to say, over the next several years, that's an area where, we'll invest pretty heavily and, ultimately try to be as, or develop programming and interact with our fans around sports betting content.
If you ever need a host, my name goes very well. Bridges Bet.
There we go. There we go.
It's amazing. What is next for Wave Sports? So how are you looking to boost your engagement with fans and bring content to their favorite leagues? With what you mentioned before, like there's more emerging platforms, right? Like you spoke about AVOD and fast. We know like free streaming is big. Obviously, all streaming is big these days. So are there any key plans that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think to summarize it, which I've touched on a bit, for us, talent driven or personality driven, original programming is key. And then what that ultimately allows us to do is expand into new formats and onto new platforms. So whether that's pods or VODs, whether that's AVOD, fast channel, so on and so forth. I think the thesis for us was always about maximizing the amount of touch points or the ways that we can engage, with our fans around the world. And so we started across, call it 5 or so odd, core social and digital platforms. But I think always had our sights set on, moving on to another half dozen or so, as, the business evolved.
Oh, I look forward to seeing that rise. We've got enough time for like one more question and then just a summary one for you. What do you think will be the most important consumption trend in the near future for media?
I'm biased, but I really do believe that we live in a creator-driven economy. So, kind of doubling or tripling down, on, this notion of, democratizing, who gets to tell the stories, and seeing, this whole, kind of emerging talent class from around the world, being a part of, talent or personality-led storytelling.
Well, I think you're right, because nowadays it's easier than ever for someone who has a personality and passion to come through, right? Like you don't always have to spend money and go to broadcasting school and kind of follow the traditional expensive route. Like any personality can emerge, which is a very great time to be alive in, I suppose. Going back to your topic of democratizing things, it's true. Like we can actually, you can step outside of what were the traditional sort of gatekeepers and emerge these days. I want to sum up or end really with, if anyone's watching and they want to discover the sports and brands that Wave Sports Entertainment covers, how could someone find that? Because I know when we spoke before, you told me that most people watch Wave Sports Entertainment don't really realize that they're watching Wave Sports Entertainment. So how can we find you?
We took a whole portfolio driven approach. So we're kind of structured, as more of a holdco from the WSE point of view. But if you were to go to our website, which is just wave.tv, there's a whole list of, all of our different media brands and franchises. And those link directly out to, whether it's Snap Discover or Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, so on and so forth. It's kind of a repository of sorts.
So everyone, if you want to find out more, go to wave.tv. And thank you very much, Brian. That was really interesting, and really appreciate taking the time today to talk with us.
Thanks so much, Gavin. I appreciate it.